Okay, great. Let me just run let me just run everything to see if everything is as it ought to be. I wonder why it canceled out from like 200 people waiting to two.
All right, I'm just gonna.
Okay, I'm just gonna check in with my moderators. Then I'm
Okay.
wait, it made two independent ones. That's interesting. Oh, it's going. Are we going
Yeah.
live now? Oh, we're live.
All
Hi
right.
fans, are we live now? Like the people who are
I
watching.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
I
we are live. That's great. Okay. Hi. You guys can hear me, right? Comment if you can hear me. Okay. How do we get to the main spot where they can see us well? Is
yeah,
it this?
I'm gonna sort that out now. 1 minute.
Okay.
Mute.
Should I stop sharing my screen and it can go to the main area?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Up to
great.
it.
Hi. Is the live stream going and all that stuff? Oh,
I
looks like
think
it.
it's all working.
Okay, great. Everything's going as planned. 80 people are watching. Fab.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
You've got 80. It says at your end, yeah.
Yeah, 80 people are watching.
Brilliant.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
And we have one person with us on Zoom. So if we're live, might just say hi. Hello, I'm Roifield, and I'm speaking to Rudyard. He doesn't need any introduction from me as to who he is because you're on his YouTube channel. He's going to be speaking at Intelligent Speech in a week's time, which is a conference which I've put together, which has 40 of the best of the internet's content creators, loosely themed around history, who are going to be talking for some 8 hours. But what we thought we'd do is give you a little bit of a taster beforehand by speaking to the good man himself and basically just asking him what he's been up to. So, first off, how this is going to work, we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the things which Rudyard's recently done and has got coming planned, and then we're going to look at your questions in the chat so you can put questions to the great man himself. It's as simple as that, and we'll chat on for an hour or so. So, Rudyard, how are you?
I'm doing quite well. Yeah, as you guys can tell, the channel's been going through a lot of changes. Starting all sorts of new things that we're going to talk about. In general, doing pretty well now. For the fans who are watching, this is effectively just the old live streams, but with some conversation attached to it, some additional stuff. So you get to ask me questions, all that stuff.
All right, so tell us what you've got cooking up for us at the moment. Obviously, we're gonna talk about things you've just released,
Yes.
but what do you have planned for us, sir?
So I'm in a couple of days, I'm going to release a video that's all going to drive you guys insane. Crisis of the 21st Century. Um, it's about how I think the 21st century in the next couple of decades will see a global crisis similar to that occurred in like the 17th and 14th century. So with revolutions in different countries, with lots of wars, lots of unpleasant stuff. And I try to not be a prophet of doom. I try to be even-handed in my doom profiting. And I try to look at the bright side because when we have it. After that, I'm planning on doing a series on exploring different civilizations. I started out the West. My next video in that series is going to be Latin America. And I'm going to look at Latin American society, how like the Spanish and indigenous and African cultures mix together to make Latin America. Then after that, I'm going to make a view at the future of ideology and religion.
Um, I know we talked about this before, but Latin America is really kind of almost ignored, isn't it?
Yeah,
When we look at history, you know, even more so, I would say, than Africa.
yeah, that's generally true. I'm reading a book called The Forgotten Continent now. It's a history of Latin America. And what it says is that Latin America is not wealthy enough, like the Western countries, to have a lot of attention paid to it. It's not big and growing enough, like the Asian ones, to have attention paid to it. And it doesn't have as many wars and poverty as Africa, so it doesn't have attention paid to it for that reason. So people just forget about Latin America, and it's really sad because there's a lot of amazing history in Latin America. The War of the Triple Alliance was one of the events that is just completely fucking insane. And yeah, so I see this a lot of my Latin American fans. They just dislike how they get ignored by the mainstream history.
Yeah, we talked about the War of the Triple Alliance
Yeah,
before, and there's always been there's been many more localized kind of conflicts in South America than you kind of care to mention. So it's the Paraguay's fought Bolivia,
yes,
Chile's fought Bolivia. Bolivia lost its coastline, etc. But also the wars of liberation under Bolivia and whatever, utterly epic things, weren't they? Which lasted like for 10 plus years, and in Europe, in North America, we barely know of them.
yeah, yeah. That's basically the case. Killed 600,000 people, 90% of Paraguay's male population. So yeah, not a good move. I mean, Paraguay declared war on countries 27 times its population size.
Yeah, that's the move of a crazy dictator. You said you're also going to do a video about ideology. Explain your thinking behind that.
Um, I mean, I'm just gonna in the Industrial Revolution has it's changed the way we live in the world so much that we basically have to figure out new ways on how to live as an industrial society, and different parts of the world are going to come to different conclusions about that. And um so I think there's a lot of really interesting possibilities. Some of them are absolutely horrifying and totalitarian. And um I just hope we don't pick a truly awful option, because I mean, if you look at the last 100 years, like we had Nazism and communism, and both of those killed tens of millions of people as the big ideologies of the 20th century.
So we've got ideologies coming. We have
Yeah,
South America, and then you said you're going to
yeah,
do a somewhat uplifting look at the 21st century.
yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm going to try to not uplifting. It's going to be absolutely horrifying, but going to try to have uplifting parts of it. Where I mean, 2100, the standard of living will almost certainly be better than what it is today, but you're still going to have lots of. I still think we're going to have lots of conflicts and stuff over the next couple decades.
Right. So before we go to questions, and we do have somebody in with us in Zoom. Tell us about the changes which you've put in place on the channel, and maybe where what we can expect from it coming soon.
Um, putting out more geopolitics videos, putting out the analyses videos. I mean, as of now, I'm doing a lot of experimentation, and this live stream is part of the experimentation where I'm trying to figure out what direction the channel should go into. And I'm just trying to see what the fans like, and what really works well for me.
And you're still studying, are you? Have you kind of
Yes.
packed that in? All right. So
Yeah.
at the end of this semester, then do you
Yes.
become a full
Yeah.
time
Uh, yeah.
YouTuber?
Yeah. Um, Indeed.
And how's that feel?
It's a good feeling. It's quite yeah, it's quite liberating.
Well, good luck to you in your future career, sir.
Thanks.
Some
Thank you.
Craft the Moon says Roifield and Rudyard sound like a bad sitcom title. Hopefully, our discourse is a little bit more fruitful than that, though. So we do have somebody with us on Zoom. Ionut Dragos Puris. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, but if you're with us, feel free to unmute and you can ask a question. Do you have a question for us?
Hello, for the moment, no.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
For the moment, no.
Um, yeah,
Very
I
short.
think go ahead. Sorry.
So I'm looking at looking at the chat. So this is your moment, basically, to ask a question to Rudyard.
Yeah.
I'll voice it to him. He'll answer, and maybe I'll ask us a supplemental. Somebody did actually ask about the Ukraine and Russia crisis. So let's start there. I did see that earlier. I've forgotten your name. Please forgive me. But maybe let's look at the historical reasons for that conflict and then where you potentially see it going in the future, Rudyard.
Okay. I mean, I don't see the Russians. So the reason the Ukraine-Russia crisis happened is that um, Russians were settled in large amount in Ukraine as part of the process of Russian colonialism. So the eastern part of the country is heavily Orthodox Russians. Western part of the country was settled during it was controlled by Poland, Lithuania, and so had more Catholic influence, more Western. And so because of that, you see the split. And the Soviet republics, it was sort of like a lot of the ex-colonial areas where they were designed completely irrationally without interest in ethnic borders because no one thought the Soviet republics would get independence. And so once Ukraine became independent, the Russian ethnic minorities wanted to be part of Russia. And so Russia was looking for reasons to basically expand outwards, and Putin wants to push the border further west so that Mother Russia isn't threatened. And so he supported separatists in the eastern part of the country. And that's basically what the Ukraine crisis is. I don't see the Russians as incentivized to take over Ukraine because they really have no need to. I mean, the only thing Ukraine could really give Russia is more grain. The Russians already have plenty of grain, and it would just make them an international pariah. So unless the global situation becomes more tense, you're not going to see Russia take over all of Ukraine. I mean, the only reason the Russians would really want it is that if the Western Bloc tries to move further across Europe, which would threaten Russia itself, and I don't think the Western powers want to get Ukraine or Belarus into their coalition because they'd end up being liabilities. It's not a defensive perimeter, and you don't want those countries would require massive amounts of aid to make them workable.
There's your first answer. Now, Stormwind says, you said in a previous video that you're genetically predisposed to marry your third cousin. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Oh yeah, so there's
referring to you in particular, or just us as a species?
us as a species. So there's this theory called the Selma Theory that humans are basically vessels for our own genes, and because of that, so like once our ability to breed declines, we age very rapidly, and so your genes want to survive, and so if you breed with someone who's genetically close to you, the chances that your genes survive are higher because you're both going to share the same genes at a higher chance. But if you marry someone who's too genetically close to you, then sorry, I read the comment at the moderator acting like China. If you're too close, then you're going to get all sorts of genetic deformities. And so the best way to maintain your own genes and to also not have genetic deformities is to marry a third cousin. And across history, the vast majority of marriages have been cousin marriages. Does this mean I will marry my cousin? Absolutely not. But at the same time, that's been the norm across history.
And I suppose it makes sense because for the majority of history, we've lived in very small communities
Yeah.
which in effect have been our extended families. So
Yes.
it would make sense. Right. Troy Davis. I haven't. I'm reading this one as it goes up. I developed a general theory of political development rooted in the mindset of uh, Sumerian elites who invented the first mental systems for the legitimization of political authority. Can I share it with you? So he's got some political theory based on the Sumerians.
Just
How?
fucking email it to me. Just
There you
go
go.
to my about section, get my email it to me.
All right. Um, Ning Ningle626 says, "You said that you're a weird sort of Christian. Could you expand on that?"
Okay. Um, so I was raised a Quaker, and that's already a very weird sect of Christianity. Um, and I mean, I'm basically more of a deist at this point where I don't believe Noah and the Ark happened. I don't believe, I don't believe in a lot of the stories in the Bible on face value. Um, and and wow, this ends up being a very complicated question. Um, I believe more in the moral structure and the moral truths you can figure out than the actual stories in of themselves. And the God I believe in is not a very personal God, so I'm really more of a deist than a Christian, to be fair.
Good answer. Right, and it's great that people want to know about you. Would a EU with only Western European countries perform better than the current EU, which obviously has the ex-Soviet republics, ex-communist republics? Sorry.
Yeah. So you have like the heartland of the EU, which, if like the old countries that used to be part of the Carolingian monarchy, like France, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Switzerland, whatever. Switzerland's not part of the EU, but get the point. They could work as a single coherent union because they've got all sorts of trade ties, all that stuff. Um, Spain, Greece, Cyprus are the areas that bring massive amounts of debt, and then the cultural differences get larger, that it makes it more difficult. I haven't seen a lot of issues with the EU come out of Poland, Baltic states. So Northern Eastern Europe, I haven't seen issues with the EU. They're largely part of Germany's supply chain. So they're part of the German economic union. So if you're Czech, German, Estonian, etc., you use your cheap labor to produce stuff for the Germans. And so they've worked with the Germans in the European Union pretty well. Um, I haven't seen big issues from like Bulgaria, Romania. I haven't seen them take on large amounts of debt. All those issues. The big issues so far I've seen are Greece, Cyprus, the pig countries, basically. Uh, I mean, I actually don't think Portugal or Spain. I don't think Portugal has a tremendous amount of debt anymore, though. I could totally be wrong there. So Spain, Italy, Greece are the big debt countries that could devalue the EU a lot.
We have another question actually about Italy. From John Coletti, what direction do you see Italy going in the future towards more? He says towards nationalisation or to decentralisation. So, is the unitary state of Italy going to maintain, or will it become more of a collection of regions like it was historically when it was dukedoms and kingdoms and etc.?
I mean, I don't think so. It's hard if unless something big happens in Europe, I don't see Italy dividing because there just isn't a big enough separatist movement for the North to split off. If something goes absolutely terrible in Europe, then I could see the North splitting off. But as of now, the unified Italian identity is too strong to pull that off.
Mm. Um, I might slightly disagree with you there.
Okay.
Was it Bossi who had his Legia of the North, the League of
Yeah,
Lombardy,
yeah,
which was
yeah,
relatively popular, and then they've now
yeah,
rebranded themselves as the League. But
yeah,
Italy's the one European country other than Britain I've been to by
yeah,
far the most. And I'm always struck by the regional differences. Naples is
yeah,
so different from Turin,
yeah.
but the future will let us know. Another question about the future: does Great Britain have a chance to become a superpower again? And if yes, how? And that's from Rule Britannia.
I'm sorry, Roifield. I'm gonna say no on this. Um,
Don't apologise to me.
yeah, Britain doesn't have the population dense. It doesn't have enough young people to really conquer stuff, and it doesn't really want to either. Like Britain doesn't have a coherent ideology of conquest. Like if you were to ask your average Briton, do we want to invade Thailand? They'd say no. I mean, Britain doesn't really have the economic incentive either to do colonization because Britain's two biggest trade partners by far are North America and Europe. I mean, you probably could throw China in there. So when you have no demographic incentive for colonization, no economic incentive for colonization, and no ideological incentive for colonization, it's not going to happen.
What do you think of Kanzuk? I'll completely put my cards on the table. I was complete utter Remainer. I don't believe that Britain should have left the EU. It provides a stable market to our largest exporting market. right? It makes geopolitical nonsense for us to leave Europe. It was a decision made more on emotion and with the symbolisms of sovereignty as opposed to geopolitical reality. There has been a move between many right-leaning politicians in Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand to have this loose trading bloc, which would be called CANZUK, which would also allow for free movement of travel between those citizens of those countries, which is, the white British Empire light. How do you feel about that?
I mean, as a Canadian citizen, I'd love to be able to move to London, no strings attached. Um, I don't think that it'll end up doing a tremendous amount, to be honest. Um, and so Canada, Australia, Britain, they're not massive trade partners as of now. They're already politically part of the same unit. Like you could basically view the English speaking countries as the same geopolitical network. So if Kanzuk were to exist, um, it would largely be on paper. And I mean, I don't see huge amounts of Australians or Canadians like, I'm going to ship off to London. And if you're from Manchester and you want to immigrate to Canada, it's relatively easy. So I would enjoy it personally. I don't see massive geopolitical implications.
From Jovan, he says, "Why do you like the Ottoman Empire so much? Also, what's the future of the Balkans?"
I don't know why everyone gets on my ass so much with the Ottoman Empire. Um, they were genuinely decent in a lot of ways. So like in a lot of the Balkan countries, when the Ottomans showed up, the local peasantry preferred the Ottomans because they were less rapacious than the local nobility. And yes, the Ottomans did do a bad by hurting the local aristocracy and the local elites and all that stuff. But at the same time, they generally ruled fairly well, and they were a meritocracy in Anatolia. So if you were a Turkish peasant, you didn't have a lord during the high point of the Ottoman Empire. A big bad you can nail them for is slavery. The Ottomans had so much slavery from places like Ukraine, places like Chechnya, Africa, etc. That's something bad they really did. They also had a kick-ass military. Like a lot of people, like most people don't realize that when Columbus sailed to the New World, the best military and most developed military in the world were the Turks. Um, Even in the mid 17th century, if lots of travelers from places like England, the Netherlands, and stuff, they went to the Turkish Empire and were shocked at how wealthy and like developed it was. Not developed. I mean, technologically, it was a bit behind, but it was they were still shocked at how well the society worked.
Did you see? Oh, crumbs! There's this. It's on Netflix. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Was it called 1453? But it's the
Oh
latest.
yeah, Ottoman Empire.
Where, but
Yeah,
but it's Suleiman and the conquest of
yeah.
1902.
Netflix. Yeah, it was on
Yeah.
Netflix.
What
Yeah.
did you think to that? I loved it.
So,
I utterly loved it.
yeah, so I don't watch a lot of Netflix to be fair. I saw about half of it because I'm a really energetic person. I have trouble just standing in front of the screen. Um, I saw it and I really enjoyed it. It's like it's a very well done documentary. It was dramatic. It got the facts right. The costume and the set design was just on point, I gotta say.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah,
So you liked it, and I liked it. So
yes,
recommendation for people watching: go watch
yes.
that. Keeping it geopolitically very close, Panos says, "What do you think about the tension in the Aegean?"
Um, I think it's just for show. The Greeks and Turks don't like each other. I think the Turks are trying to make the Aegean make it look really tight in order to basically in order to amp up Turkish pride because the Greeks and the Turks have been fighting for 1,000 years. And so by amping up the dislike of the Greeks, they're building their own support. If the Turks were to invade Greece, it would be an international fiasco. I mean, members of NATO fighting each other, the rest of Europe would back the Greeks. Um, Greece also has a remarkably outsized military for what their population and economy is. The Turks would probably win that war, but I don't think it's going to happen for the near future, as in the next 5 years.
We have a question from, I'm going to say, Maria. Will Ireland ever be united? I'm going to answer that one for you. it's going to happen much sooner than everybody thinks. As a Brit, I'm absolutely telling you, demographically, it's almost 50-50 with the amount of people in the province of Ulster that
Yeah.
want to be part of a united Ireland. It will happen much sooner than everybody thinks. And the move that the United Kingdom made to leave the EU is going to accelerate all those
Yeah.
political pressures. So there,
Yeah.
you don't even have to answer that one. I've given you the answer. Somebody says, "Mate, you've got a really nice voice." I presume you're talking about me. Thank you. Um,
Wow.
David says we're trying to get rid of Northern Ireland. Yes, right. Adam, what do you think about the geopolitics of Hungary? I think about Hungary's closeness to the West, but openness to Russia and China. So yes, what do we think about modern day Hungary geopolitically?
I mean, I don't see them siding with anyone except the West because they remember being conquered by the Soviets, which was deeply unpleasant. Um, Hungary's like a hinge point of Europe where there's lots of different ways you can view Hungary. You could either view it as the Western extension of the Eurasian steppe. And I mean, the Hungarians are a steppe language. I mean, the Hungarians speak a steppe language. They are steppe people, although they are genetically Slavic for the most part. Um, but they're also the entrance to Europe, where Austria is about as Western as you can get. And then Hungary is like a weird mix of the Balkans, um, Asia, and Europe, but it's all inside of Europe. And the Carpathian Basin, with all surrounded by mountains, it kind of creates like a it creates like a tub where once the tub gets filled, it's hard for stuff to leave. Um, and so you've seen the Hungarians work with the Ottoman Turks, you've seen them work with the Russians and that stuff. For now, I think they're going to work with the West. Even if Turkey resurges, and I don't think the Turks would get to the Hungarian area in the near future at all, I think it would still stay with the West because there's a big geographic difference between the area south of Belgrade and north of it. And I think that would probably end up being a border. That's you have two natural borderlands in that region. One's in Belgrade, one's in Vienna. Um, and I think that the Belgrade line, as of now, makes more sense than the Vienna line.
Trodholm says, interesting to hear Roifield's opinions as well. Well, thank you. A. Zachary Webb, do you think that Ethiopia will be a great power in the future?
I've made a video on this. Yes, they're industrializing, and they're the main people industrializing in that area. They're the main power in that area that has a history of empire. I mean, Ethiopia's had powerful empires for 3,000 years, um, and they're expanding or force in that area. So they're planning on building a navy to hold down the Somalian pirates. And a lot of their neighbors are pretty weak. So South Sudan, Somalia, those are both very weak states that the international community would be happy to have more Ethiopian influence in them just to have less piracy and famine.
Uh, uh, Dalchemy says this guy's liberal AF, probably referring to me. I'm not a neoliberal. If you're referring to me, all right.
People refer to everyone as a neoliberal. It's like,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's go through these. Do you think Russia is able to become a world power or not? That's from Swing Doors.
I mean, they've done it twice. I mean, they've done it a couple times, and I'd put the chance. I'm talking about this in my next video. I put the chance of Russia becoming a world power in the next 50 years at around a quarter. So the Russians have been very tough people, and they've been able to make a couple really weird turns where you'd think they would have collapsed, but they pulled their shit together. That happened after World War One, happened in the 18th century, happened with Ivan the Terrible. So I wouldn't be surprised if they can reform, but also their demographics are really terrible, where every generation their population is going to have because they're just not having enough kids, and they don't really have a strong coherent ideology. Like there's isn't a sense of I mean, there's a lot of sense of pride in being Russian, but not in the current political force, where like there's more Russian money outside of Russia than inside it because Russian oligarchs take the money, they put it in Cyprus, London, Paris, New York. And so there's no faith that the money will support the Russian nation in an effective manner. Because there's no faith in that Russia will work as a society. And I think that's really important. They'd have to change that to become a power.
What are your thoughts on the Western Sahara War and its future? And that's from
Um,
Mauritius. Oh, sorry, I got my glasses on. Screen's too far away.
are
There's the
I don't
question.
know. Are you referring to Western Sahara, the country between the Sahrawi
I,
Pact and the
I
Moroccans?
believe
Because
so. It's Polisario, isn't it? Polisario and the
yeah,
Moroccan.
that's not even a real war. The Moroccans won and took everything important and left the rest to the Sahrawi Pact.
Yeah. So it will rumble on as a very lukewarm conflict. Is your answer to that? Do you think Turkey could expand into the Balkans even if they were challenged by Russia and America and the EU?
Okay. So the biggest limiting factor on Turkey's growth is America. If America doesn't want Turkey to expand, it's not going to happen. Economically and demographically, the Balkans are going to get pulled into Turkey's sphere. The Balkan countries absolutely despise the Turks. And that's a big factor pushing against it. All the Balkan countries have absolute declining population, not like Japan or Britain or stuff, where the population's aging. No, Yugoslavia has lost people since the countries that are now Yugoslavia have lost population since Yugoslavia was a country. And also economically, all the rivers in that area flow into Turkey and the Black Sea. However, America could stop the Turks from expanding the Balkans if America wanted to, because NATO is so powerful. A lot of this depends on what America's future foreign policy is, where if America wants to control Europe past Belgrade, then that's not going to happen. But if not, it could. This is nothing that's going to happen in the next 10 years, in my opinion. It's something that would happen in the distant future. And I don't want to get everyone like too worked up about it. And I don't see the Russians expanding the Balkans anytime soon. I mean, the Russians don't even control Ukraine. I mean, because Russia's on a flat plane, and they're going to have to control that flat plane first, where they can push into the Balkans. The natural hinge of Russian power was really like Moldova, because Moldova is where the Carpathians are closest to the Black Sea, and so that's the logical defensive spot of Russian power. And I mean, the Russians do have a lot of influence in Moldova now because of Russian ethnic minorities.
Transdnistra, which is that
Yeah,
little
exactly.
Soviet Russian republic there. How effectively do you end the whole collapsing demography thing, and how would you go about it? And that's from Flecken's Teleworm.
Um, so there's a couple correlations that you can look for, one of which is urbanization. Um, the world is getting more urbanized now, but Zoom could change that, where like, let's say rather than working in New York City, living in a New York suburb, I could live in a city 2 hours outside of New York, way cheaper, have more kids, then commute into New York twice a week and do the rest on Zoom. That's something that could happen. The second is there's a correlation between religiosity and birth rate is pretty high. So if you had a religious resurgence, you would have a higher birth rate. Um, Also, we industrially haven't really figured out how to balance family with work, where we've just we've just started to we haven't really figured out, like, lots of people are dissatisfied with work-life balance in the industrial world, and we haven't figured that out properly. And I hope we can find out a compromise in the future, like this is an acceptable amount of hours to work, like this is not really fully formed, but we haven't really evolved as an industrial civilization yet, and so we'll probably figure out more stuff in the future.
Another one from Rule Britannia, and I'm just looking at these somewhat
Yeah,
randomly. Was the British Empire a force for good or bad, in your opinion?
I don't like to judge the world in those terms because it ends up creating weird binaries. um I mean, the British Empire certainly did both, and I don't want to discredit either one. The British Empire spread democracy. It was massive economic growth. It stopped like the Nazis. It ended a slave trade across a lot of the world, and it also did bad. It oppressed India, did the African slave trade. On a balance sheet, I would put Britain doing more good. but I do have my biases there. I'm an English speaking American of British descent, but I would say Britain did more good for spreading democracy, the Industrial Revolution, ending slavery, fighting against the Nazis. Um, and I mean, the big thing with the British Empire was lots of empires do bad stuff, but very few of them actively try to do good stuff. And then that's something you can definitely say for the British at points where they actively did try to be moral.
Hmm. Somebody from India might take
Yeah.
question that. However, two things can be true at once. Right,
Yeah.
from Devanesh, India has made a deal with Russia for their S-400 missiles, which puts them liable for US sanctions under the CAA-TSA. Must be a treaty. Do you think the US will go forward with this considering their strategic relations?
Um, I honestly don't follow weapons deals enough. It doesn't seem like a useful usage of my time, to be absolutely blunt. It's like people are like, "What are your thoughts on this tank in World War II?" And I'm like, "I don't care." Um, but I mean, a lot of this is way more realpolitik than we think because we tend to portray stuff in the media as just black and white, all these narratives. But all the leaders involved know that everyone else is making deals with everyone else. So Russia and India are allies. We and Russia are enemies, and we all know that. But we're also allies with India, and we know that we have to tolerate the Americans. Americans have to tolerate the Indians doing deals with the Russians in order for us to have the Indians work with us against China. So it's all like a game of three-dimensional chess. Like in a lot of my maps, I have the world be two broad coalitions, American and Chinese. That's not really a great way of viewing it. It's every single country is a different player. I mean, like even Iceland. Iceland's probably cutting deals with like all sorts of different countries to have sell cod more efficiently.
Cool. And famously defeated the United Kingdom three times in the
Yes.
famous cod wars of the 1970s. The moon, we have a message from the moon. The moon says, "What are your thoughts on the Venezuela crisis?"
Um, it was entirely predictable if you saw what happened in other similar Latin American countries. Um, so you had a lot of socialist governments in 2004 to 2014-ish in Latin America because commodity prices were super high and most South American countries are dependent upon commodities. So it's interesting to read Colombian history because like coffee price is high, lots of stuff gets built. Then coffee price declines, country collapses into civil war. So the price of everything was high in early 21st century because China was industrializing, and so South America was having a really good era, and so they were spending that money around in lots of welfare payments. Venezuela was the one that went furthest on that path. Like Argentina, Chile, those countries, they did decently off it. Um, you could have predicted Venezuela if you saw Cuba and you saw what happened in Chile for the first couple of years. Venezuela really makes me sad. I watched this amazing documentary by The People, which is this badass Russian YouTube channel that you need to watch. It's this guy goes to the worst neighborhoods in the world, and he went to Venezuela, and to buy a single hamburger, he had to like drop this much cash, and it was like 40 USD to buy a hamburger. Well, he could fill up gas for like 11 cents. And it's really sad because Venezuela's got so much oil to export. It used to be the richest country in Latin America, so there's definitely the potential there. But in a lot of ways, it's just getting crushed.
Uh, Question from Jacob Logan. What do you think about the future of Egypt? And I think somewhat interesting considering what you think about the potential future of Ethiopia. So why don't we
Yeah,
expand?
I'm sorry. I don't see good things in Egypt's future. Um, their population. So, first of all, Ethiopia is damming up the Nile, which the Nile has always been Egypt's lifeblood. I mean, the actual amount of habitable land in Egypt is about the size of Belgium because it's all a string along the Nile. And 100 million people live in that. And Egypt's a quarter agriculture, it's a quarter farmers who are totally dependent upon the Nile. So that's one factor. The second is they've had massive population growth without really the ability to um, without having economic growth. So the amount of people in poverty in Egypt went from 16% in 2000 to over like 38% now, which is just horrific. Where most of the world, you've seen massive declines in poverty. Um, I think over a billion people got out of poverty in those 20 years. Um, and at the same time, the government seems entirely irresponsive. So the government's building massive, like, they're building a new capital away from Cairo, and it's got like a water park. It's got like massive palaces, and it's just, I was looking at it, I'm like, how are you not asking for a revolution with this? Um, so I don't see good things in Egypt's future. I'm sorry.
And it's somewhat Egypt has really marched backwards, hasn't it? Because it was the
Yeah,
preeminent Arab power.
yeah,
It led the wars against Israel.
yeah,
Under Nasser, it was seen as the
yeah,
de facto Arab power. So yes, the
yeah.
decline of Egypt. A question from Marcel Ferret, and if I'm not pronouncing your names correctly, please forgive me. Have you read The Shortest History of Germany by James Hawes?
I've seen that in a lot of libraries, haven't read it though. I don't really like a lot of German histories because
What?
most of them are basically just leading up to the Nazis. Most of them are like 30 years war to the Nazis. And I don't really like histories that are written backwards, where it's like almost all Japanese histories are leading up to World War II. And it just a kind of a boring narrative where it's like, and then Germany got more militaristic, and then Germany conquered more stuff, and then the Prussians got more hardcore. And when you read histories of the rest of Europe, you realize so much more was going on in Germany than that. I don't want to judge that history though because I haven't read it.
Horatius GM says, "Is it possible that in the near future, communist China will fall like the USSR?"
I mean, I think it's entirely reasonable. I mean, I've talked about the demographics a lot in the show where China's populate. So China's real birth rate is one child per woman. So their population is going to have in the next generation plus. And so China is dependent on having a cheap workforce. It's getting less and less the case, but it's not Germany or Japan level where really high tier manufacturing. So if they have to pay for a massive elderly population at the same time as trying to do economic growth, it's just going to absolutely crush them. And the CCP, so once they moved off Maoism, they didn't really have a strong belief structure to hold the nation together through hardship. And what the CCP basically did is they said, we'll give you money if you support all this autocracy and stuff and don't let Taiwan happen. Um, and don't let us become like Taiwan. And so once you hit hardship, the CCP is going to go hard totalitarian and try to gain total control over the society, or it's going to fall apart. And hardship always happens at some point or another.
Um, this one's from Dragonstorm, and it says, "What is the future of Myanmar?"
That depends a lot on everyone around Myanmar. So it Burma can't become Burma's really good. So Burma's the poorest nation in that area because it had a lot of really nasty dictators for a while who kind of held back its progress. Burma had it's the immensely wealthy land, a lot of rice there. So it's going to end up being the bread bowl or rice bowl for either India or China. I don't see it becoming an independent power player of either China or India. Geographically, it would make more sense as part of an Indian economic orbit, but India is not wealthy enough to really suck all of the countries around it into its economic orbit. As of now, it seems to be under heavy Chinese influence. This coup that lately happened, I don't know who the military is supporting. It seems heavily likely that the military is pro-Chinese. So in Burma, the military was pro-Chinese. The government seemed kind of pro-Western when this was waffling in between. I think Burma in the future is going to make a hard Chinese turn.
Now, this person has asked this question 1,000 times. Nicholas Meinhardt, how likely would it have been for Bohemia to become a big empire instead of Austria?
I think it's actually possible. So inside the Austrian Empire, until it was the wealthiest, most developed part of it. Then, after the 30 Years' War, after Bohemia rebelled against the Habsburgs purposely made the Czechia poorer so that to weaken it and to make it more submissive. And so, I mean, Prague in the Czech Republic used to be the center of the Holy Roman Empire, like the 15th century, and you could have that could have happened. And I honestly think it's more likely that the Czech Republic ended up, or Bohemia remained on top rather than Austria, because Bohemia was far better situated. I think the biggest thing pushing Austria forward was just being on the frontier against the Turks, which forced the Austrians to really stick together and gave them a lot of cohesion.
A question about Kosovo. What do you think will happen to Kosovo? Is going to be a status quo or unification with Albania and or collapse?
To be fair, I don't follow the Balkans very much. Um, I think it's just going to be stasis. If it were to happen in 5 years, then I wouldn't be surprised. But I haven't really put in the research to have a very educated opinion.
Um, Andrea Gandolfini, do you think there was a way to not let Italy become fascist after World War One? Was it inevitable?
Um,
Is the question.
I mean, nothing's ever inevitable. They could have gone communist. They could have had a charismatic democratic leader. Italy had a very strong left, so it's possible they could have gone communist. An issue would have run into with communism is that every other country in that area would have ganged up on them and tried to crush a communist revolution. Italy's not Russia. Russia, if you invade, you'll get stuck in. But the British, the French, and stuff, they could have shelled Naples and Genoa and those cities. So if Italy went communist, then the British and French would have probably showed up and reinstalled the monarchy. Um, there wasn't a lot of belief in democracy in Italy, I think. But if you had a massively charismatic leader, I think they could have pulled it off.
Franz Joseph, gosh, the old Austrian emperor is back, and he's on
Yes,
YouTube. He says, which
exactly.
which European independence movement outside of the UK and France is most likely to succeed? In other words, yank it out of the EU.
Outside of the UK or France, most likely to succeed. Um, maybe this is a difficult question. The one that would make the most sense is there's loads that make sense but aren't going to happen. So Somaliland really should be an independent country.
Oh no, no,
Um,
no. He says the EU. Which
oh,
independent?
inside the EU.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Scotland could make a lot of sense for me. Where I mean, if Britain leaves the EU and bad things happen, then I think Scotland could become independent. Catalonia makes a lot of sense, but the central government in Spain doesn't want it to happen. My own personal pet one is Breton independence, but that's not going to happen. Um,
I think what the question is referring to, I could be wrong, Franz Joseph,
yes.
but I think what they're referring to is which independent movement will pull a country out of the EU.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's what I think
Um,
they're referring to.
yeah. If Marine Le Pen wins, maybe France. I don't know after Macron what Marine's chances are. If France pulls out of the EU stops existing basically, or it becomes entirely German centered, Eastern Europe, all that stuff. Um, I mean, I'm kind of surprised Greece hasn't left the EU, but they're financially dependent upon the EU. Um, this is the thing I honestly probably should have put way more thought into, but random answer France.
Okay. Right. A question for me from Jackson Kelly. Hey, Roifield, what do you think of the Northumbria independence movement? I think it's somewhat of a pipe dream, and it's somewhat of a romantic whimsy. However, there was a question which somebody asked before, which I'm not going to scroll to because then I'll lose my place completely, which basically said, and I'll ask you the question and then I'll also give my answer. What do you think of the UK becoming a truly federal state, with Northern Ireland becoming a state, Scotland becoming one, and England maybe splitting up into about nine?
Um, I don't think that would work because the national identities are too strong. I don't think the English want to split into different states. And a lot of the UK is so London centric, I think that would end up being a problem. I think just a system by which you have the UK, you have England, then the Welsh and the Scots and the North Irish and stuff get their own parliaments could be entirely reasonable to me.
And my quick answer on this, I'm much more. I think this is much more likely than Rudyard being British. Uh, If this was to happen, it would be a way of Scotland keeping Scotland as part of the United Kingdom. However, there's going to be a completely different political mind. There needs to be a completely different political mindset for England to be divided up into, potentially nine different areas of governance. We actually have them for regional development. So there is a Midlands and a West Midlands and an East Anglia and a North of England, etc. So we actually have them, but not in terms of political governance. As Rudyard said, the EU. The UK is incredibly London centric, and this is one of the ideas to kind of break that logjam so we can have investment going into Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Birmingham, etc., without all these decisions being always pushed through London. But there need to be an utter political earthquake for it to happen. Scotland can leave, and it's 50-50 whether Scotland will. Northern Ireland, I guarantee you, in 20 years will not be a part of the United Kingdom. They will have voted to unite with Ireland, even though the Irish don't want them because it's an economic drain. You'll be left with England and Wales as constituent parts of the United Kingdom. And then with that, England is much bigger than Wales economically and politically. So that could well be the the political earthquake that you need for that to come about. There's my
Would
thought on it. Go
would
on.
like Robbie Williams and Noddy Holder run to be governor of Birmingham?
Well, Robbie Williams is from Stoke. Noddy Holder, yes, is from Greater Birmingham. I think Noddy Holder's actually from Wolverhampton. Could be wrong, but you know a little bit of your English culture, sir. So well done. What do you think about the Chinese sending a peacekeeping force to Afghanistan after the US leaves? And that's from Boris Lam.
I, I mean, part of me wants to believe in the humanitarian abilities of the Chinese Communist Party, but part of me also, a larger part of me, thinks it's just a cynical way of getting railroads so that they can ship oil to the Middle East with the Belt and Road. Because Afghanistan's super central to all of Eurasia, and so if the Chinese can just cut through Afghanistan, it means that all of their railroads going out west so that they can trade with the Middle East and West and Europe and all that stuff, it would make it a lot easier. And China needs to get oil shipped overland so that in a conflict, the US can't blockade them. And Afghanistan's part of that. I mean, China's also just trying to expand into everywhere in Central Asia. So there's so much Chinese influence in Kazakhstan, Pakistan, etc. So it makes sense that they'd want to go into Afghanistan.
Craft the Moon says, "Have you been to West Virginia? And if so, how was the trip?"
I went to West Virginia once. Actually, I've been twice. Once I went when I was 6. Once I went when I was 15. Don't remember when I was 6. I've been to Harper's Ferry, which is where West Virginia, West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland's meet. Um, it was very beautiful, wooded. I haven't been to legit West Virginia, so I haven't. Where I went was kind of milk toast West Virginia. It was like an extension of Maryland. I haven't like been to the real West Virginia with moonshine and like bears and all that stuff.
Where people marry their first cousins and not their third. That West Virginia.
Exactly.
Doctor Evil says, "What do you think about Dan Carlin's hardcore history episodes?"
I like it a lot. It's good stuff. Eminently, yeah. I mean, I think it's the best presented history I've seen so far. Where I listened to all 24 hours of the World War I podcast on the Appalachian Trail, and it was awesome. I mean, I will forever associate World War I with the Appalachian Trail. I remember hiking through the woods at night, and I was running out of battery. I was trying to get to the end point to like get to a campsite because I was climbing up a mountain. There was nowhere I could set up a tent. I was really thirsty. I was listening to Caesar and Gaul and how the Romans were marching and the Celts ambushed them, and it was just epic.
And do you another question here? It's from Kes Connix. Do you think Switzerland will ever stop being neutral? If yes, in what circumstances?
No, I mean Switzerland's been neutral since the dawn of time. I mean, it would have to be the end of the world for the Swiss to stop being neutral.
There you go. Succinct answer. Will COVID be forgotten like the Spanish flu was?
Probably. I mean, not that many people have actually died of COVID. I think if COVID happened 100 years ago, it probably wouldn't even be classified as an illness because it would they just view it as a they just view it as like a weird fever because it kills basically only the it kills largely the elderly who we didn't have a lot of 100 years ago. And I mean, also we're probably going to have illnesses worse than COVID in the future because the way we're burning through antibiotics.
Right, this is an interesting question from Yelts331. You are appointed as dictator of a fairly small country, population about 20 million. How do you ensure survival and thriving in the long term?
Um, so I would do the Hamilton method, which is basically national bank tariffs and national bank tariffs and build infrastructure. And that's the method that's worked for basically every developing country, including the US when it was a developing country, to become wealthy. And it's worked pretty well. I would try to stamp out corruption by building a fanatical cult of people who would ideologically call each other out. And then I would have horrific penalties for corruption. And then I would try to step down from power after a couple of years so that it wouldn't fall apart and try to create a democratic system.
Wow. What doesn't absolute power corrupt absolutely? You can see, so he's going to, I'll step down, but you won't. You'll be dictator for life. I can see yourself going to the local cathedral and putting a crown on your head.
Watch me.
Oh, all right, we will do. Do you think Belgium will survive as a state and or country?
I mean, it depends on how much happens in Europe. I mean, as of now, it's Belgium's a comfortable stasis. I mean, they're comfortable not doing a lot and just making money. If Europe gets completely screwed over in the near future, then Belgium will split because there's a decent chance Belgium splits because not a lot really holds Belgium together.
And maybe linked to that, which country is most likely to collapse in the coming years? Tell you what, just give us five. Give us five countries which you think split and collapse may be two different things. So we're on about collapse as opposed to
Hey,
gonna go.
guys, you watch my videos. Why do you ask me questions that are literally headline topics of videos I have done?
Well, maybe this person hasn't gone
Okay,
through all of your output.
okay. So, um, for collapse, I did Egypt, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, um, Indonesia, and North Korea. Um, there are loads of smaller countries I didn't cover in that video. Like, I mean, the Congo could easily collapse. Like Sierra Leone could easily collapse. Papua New Guinea could easily collapse. But I focused on larger countries that yeah, I focused on larger countries for that video. Countries that could split. I mean, it's possible Canada could split, possible the UK could split, possible Belgium could split, all that stuff.
There you go. A lot of questions here about have you listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History? I thought we'd answer that one. Um,
Yeah.
Let's go through this. Will climate change be successfully controlled by the world, or will we see its harsh consequences? And that's from
Yeah.
Jacob Hogan.
One of the things is we know a lot less about climate science than we think we do, where there are two situations, one in which we're great, one in which we aren't. So we've already probably reached peak carbon emissions. And a lot of areas like China and India are trying to switch off coal. And coal is basically literally doing anything except coal would be awesome for the environment. Like lots of people are like, we need to switch to renewables now. No, just getting off coal would be awesome. And that's happening. So we're going to hopefully see carbon emissions declining in the future. And we don't know for the climate if it's a switch or a lever. So we don't know if the climate gradually gets worse. And if that's the case, then London becomes like London becomes Lyon, New York becomes Baltimore or DC. Everything works out fine. The other situation is the climate's a switch where things get worse in a second. And I mean, a lot of the climate's highly complex systems where like some ocean current stops working, which makes the world warmer. And if that's the case, then bad things are going to happen. And we really don't know which of those two things is true.
Somewhat related. tangentially to that. What if the potato was native to Europe? How would history have been different?
Europe would have had a lot more people. I don't really see any difference besides that. The it would have allowed greater population density in Northern Europe. It would have involved more hoe agriculture, less plow agriculture, that stuff.
Right, with far right ideals on the rise, what do you think of the future of Eastern Europe and the European Union? That's from Anthony Herdeman.
Hmm. Um, a big issue I see with Europe going forward is that there isn't really a coherent ideology, same as America, where you have the left and the right, and there isn't really a coherent message going forward of like there's not a lot to like counteract there isn't like a coherent message to counteract the far right that the left has. And so I'm really hoping to develop some form of unitary ideology that can pull the far right people in and like de-radicalize them.
Franz Joseph, the Austrian Emperor, is back. How did North Korea survive the end of the Cold War?
Their leaders were hard asses basically and basically tunneled down. Where in the 1990s there was 1990s when they got stuff, they stopped getting supplies from the Soviet Union and their economy collapsed. They basically did juche super hard, which is self-reliance, and they were like, we need to basically we need to rely upon ourselves. If we starve, that's fine. We just need to survive as a nation. And they did that, and the military was able to maintain a stronghold. I think it's just the North Koreans wanted to remain, or the leadership wanted super hard. And a lot of the communist world, they didn't. A lot of it, the communist leadership knew that they were going to fall out of power. And they just wanted a lot of them knew that capitalism was better and they wanted the best for their people. North Korea, they're like, we don't give a fuck. We're just going to stay really hard communists.
Max Pozzi says, you said that the idea that white Americans would become a majority minority is a myth because of birth rates and immigration would not stay the same. Can you explain what you meant with immigration?
Yeah, so the projection to say America will become a majority minority country factored in both Hispanic birth rates remaining higher than they did. So it projected Hispanic birth rates continuing at the rate they were. Well, in reality, they collapsed because immigrants normally, most immigrant populations after two generations converge with the normal with the local population's birth rate. The second thing is it also factored in that immigration would continue to happen, but the U.S. has made a hard anti-immigrant turn lately, both Trump and Biden, and so from both of those factors, it's kind of stalled out. The U.S. will become a much more diverse country, but it won't become majority minority for like 30 more years, I think.
I have another thought on this, and it's something which
Yes.
I've banged on about ad
Yes.
nauseum. One of the interesting things about America is its inclusion of
Yeah.
peoples
Yeah.
in terms of the what in terms of being classed as white and the label of
Yeah.
white.
Yeah.
So when Italians first came at the end of the
Yeah.
19th century, they weren't classed as white. When
Yes.
the Irish came, they had a
Yeah.
weird kind of status.
Yeah.
But the Irish became white, the Italians became white, the Greeks, etc.,
Yes.
etc. And actually, in the last 50 years, Arabs have gone from being seen as being white to
Yeah.
non-white. So
Yeah.
what's going to happen is when that largest other cohort of people, Latinos, that they will
Yes.
be co-opted as being white, or at
Yes.
least some of them. So, and the great example there is someone like Cameron Diaz. We
Yes.
don't actually see her as being Latino. She's just a white American actor, but her surname is Diaz. So Cuban
Yeah.
Americans will be white, and let's say Chilean Americans, Argentinian Americans,
Yes.
etc., etc. So
Yeah.
the whole notion of what it is to be white will actually expand, and
Yeah.
Latinos will be fragmented. But great
Yeah.
question.
I
Um,
entirely agree with you on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
a lot of the race definitions are really dumb. Like a Turkish person would be considered non-white, but a Greek or a Jew would be considered white. And I mean, a lot of this is really artificial.
Absolutely is.
Yeah.
Absolutely is. Um, Isaac Bordeaux. How would the discovery of aliens affect religion, culture, politics, and technology?
It would put everything else in perspective. So as of now, we classify the world in terms of human and non-human. Or sorry, we classify the world between different human categories. And if we had aliens, all of human civilization, we'd look at the commonalities across human culture rather than the differences. And a lot of what we're doing now is finding the differences in human culture. And we just assume that we assume we look at lots of commonalities, but once we would see things to put our own existence in perspective, then we would start to do that because it ties our self-interest, and we just see how much we had in similar against aliens would be way weirder.
This question has just jumped up my screen. I've just lost it. I think I know the answer to this, but I can't see who actually asked it, so forgive me. Are you a monarchist?
It's fine. You can just say the question.
Yeah, are you a monarchist? Is the question.
Am I monarchist?
Yeah.
Okay. I I mean, I don't think America should be a monarchy. I think monarchies are reasonable forms of government. I mean, I would support monarchy over a dictatorship. Monarchies tend to have better track records. Like, I would prefer to live in Jordan than Iraq. I'd prefer to live in Thailand than Vietnam under the communists. I mean, stuff like that.
Mm. All right, cool. Let's look through this. What if England had stayed Catholic? Please answer. From D. Richter.
Wow. The big difference between Catholic and Protestant countries was that Protestant countries had 100-year head start in industrialization because they had far higher literacy. Because for Protestantism, you have to read the Bible to like commune with God and that stuff. Catholicism, a priest reads the Bible before he tells you what to believe. So that's why Protestant countries did industrialize much faster. Part of me also wonders if it's a spurious correlation because if you look at Germany, um, the if you look at Germany, there's no difference between Protestant Catholic countries in industrial level and industrial speed. So it makes me wonder if it's the other way around, where countries that would have industrialized anyway converted to Protestantism and vice versa. Um, I really can't answer that. I would say if England was Catholic, England was the big Protestant country for a while. So you would have seen Catholicism be far more powerful. You probably would have seen the Dutch reconquer. You would have seen the Dutch get crushed and turn Catholic. You would have seen you basically the only Protestant areas would be the far north of Germany and Scandinavia.
Thoughts on Arctic colonization? Is it pointless, or will it strategic? Will it be strategic in the future? That's from Jeff Weiss.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how bad global warming gets. So if global warming gets really bad, then sure. I mean, I've heard that the Yukon and Alaska could have, if it was warm enough, it would be one of the world's top bread baskets. So if the world gets warm enough, of course, we're going to colonize the Arctic. If the world gets slightly warmer, we're going to see more shipping to the Arctic. But modern shipping is so advanced, you don't really need ports because you can just go across half the world without stopping. You'd see like 3 ports develop in the Arctic Circle, maybe like 5. And then people would use that to basically people would use that as their stopping points, but you wouldn't see a mass settling in the Arctic because modern shipping is so unpersonal and robotic, basically.
Mateus Sonny Neto. Would somehow the United Kingdom of Portugal and Brazil survive? I suppose it should be could it have somehow survived?
I mean, Catalonia. So if you start in the 15th century, yes, when both countries didn't have empires and all that stuff. Because Catalonia or Aragon and Castile survived as a unified country. Once you get to empires and each country's developed their own trade systems and stuff, it gets more difficult. So no. Also, I mean, England would continually push to have Portugal be independent as their ally and to weaken Spain.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Uh, Daxon Min. Any thoughts on India's future?
I already made a video on this, but I honestly don't know. It hangs by a lot of hinges. I think India has to become wealthier and industrialized because you see few countries that get stuck at half industrialization. Um, there's a lot of facts. So I'm not going to pretend to fully understand India. India's got so many moving parts that it's difficult for an outsider to understand between caste, religion, region, language, etc. I don't see India becoming as wealthy as China, um, just because you've got all of those different mitigating factors, and um, you've got all those mitigating factors that don't exist in China that make trade and all that stuff more difficult. Um, I do see India becoming wealthier and sucking Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc., into its economic orbit because India is just so huge.
Grievous666 says, "Have you ever been skeptical about democracy?"
Not really. I mean, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst system except for all the others.
Good answer. Right, this is from Tuzart. For a world building project, how do you think the future of space and the permanent settlement of colonialization of the moon and Mars could go, especially with powers such as China, the USA, and the EU?
Um, so, um, Space in the short term makes economically very little sense with human life because the colonization of space is remarkably expensive and it's hard to get a capitalist economy to go for it because you'd only reap the benefits decades afterwards. The exceptions, asteroid mining and robots. I think the colonization of space have to be a pseudo religious thing where people feel the need to colonize space out of some moral desire to expand the human race. And you're basically seeing that in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has immense interest in colonizing space right now, not for really economic gain, but just for the hype of it, because Elon's doing it and it's cool and it would be awesome if you colonize space. Um, and so I do think we're going to colonize space with people. I think it's going to be one of those things where once space shows up and becomes there's going to be an interest group demanding continuous colonization of space. Um, and I think that's that.
Okie dokie. Speaking of the inclusiveness of US culture, will the balkanization of social media weaken its capability to stay inclusive? That's from
I think again, social media is so difficult where we've only just started doing it, and there's a lot of stuff where we haven't really figured out rules of politeness and stuff on social media, where there's lots of stuff you do on social media where if you do it as an actual person, you'd be a complete jerk, like your entire friend group would isolate you. And I think we have to figure that out, where we have to figure out rules of politeness online for society to survive. Like we have to figure out like what's because a lot of the anonymity, whatever, makes the internet worse. And like we need to develop a culture where like if you use certain kinds of arguments on like Facebook or stuff, you're just going to get lambasted by everyone else in the comment section as an asshole. Or if you post stuff on Instagram, everyone's like, are you trying to like provoke envy and make like and all that stuff? So I think social media can work, but it's just we have to mold our society around social media and create norms of what's acceptable on it.
Despacito 2 says, if you were the leader of Afghanistan, what would be your first step?
Moving out of the country and giving up because it sounds too hard. But in real terms, I would try to negotiate treaties in different tribal groups so that to end the war, I might just kind of run it laissez-faire because I don't see any way I, as president, could actually control the different tribal groups. I would I would try to create it into a confederacy like Canada, where each tribal group manage themselves. They don't have power over each other. They vote in like a parliament. I would try to build lots of roads to get around the mountains to improve trade. I would try to remove crime in the cities. I just try to make it as stable a country as possible so people have the opportunity to really like manifest their abilities.
Mm. Tell you what, the first thing I'd do is I'd bring the monarchy back. 'Cause
Yeah,
symbolically, it'd be a
yeah,
way of putting a line under the last 40
yeah,
odd years of invasions, whether it's the Soviets,
yeah,
the Americans, the Taliban, and
yeah.
whatever. So I'd
And it
go
was
backwards to look forward.
Yeah. And it was very stable under the monarchy, to be fair. It was one of the safest countries in the area.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the old king, the last king, did go back a couple of years ago before he died, and he had some
Mm,
slightly elevated status. He wasn't the king, but they was kind of
yeah.
recognised as being a benevolent leader.
Yes.
Right, Melissa Stevens. If Napoleon had won, wouldn't Europe remained united? Let me say this again. If Napoleon had won, would would have Europe remained
Give me
under
a second.
Napoleon to the present, or would Napoleon's empire have collapsed later in the 19th century or the 20th? This is a question for both of y'all.
The big issue with Europe is that there's so much disparate culture and that stuff that it's difficult to maintain under any centralized government. The European balance of power naturally goes towards disunity. So I would see the Russians and the Russians basically push against the French really hard. I'd see the British rebel. Just don't think there are enough Frenchmen to hold down the rest of Europe. I think they could have a situation where they control the Rhinelands, everything west of it. I think the French could hold on to Western Europe. But I think Central Europe would just continually be just very stressful for the French to manage.
Mhm.
Sorry, I have to plug in my computer, guys.
And if I'm forced to have an opinion on this, the answer is absolutely no. The French would have been seen as colonial oppressors
Yeah,
in Germany, in Illyria, etc., and in Italy.
yeah,
So whilst initially there would have been a period of economic boom because they've got rid of these old economic and political structures in in Germany, let's say. So they got rid of the
yeah,
Holy Roman Empire. So there would have been a period of, let's say, 20 years worth of economic
yeah,
and political growth. Then those peoples would have says, wait on a minute, why can't we rule ourselves completely? Why do we have these
yeah,
imposed Napoleonic kings and dukes, etc.,
yeah,
throughout our land? So ultimately, it would have been for nothing.
yeah.
Um, Shrek Gaming says, "Why do the peoples who created or who helped create modern civilizations are now weak and are no longer important in the world?" Uh, I get your meaning. You English obviously isn't your first language, and it says we're looking at Italy, Spain, the Arabs, India, and South China. Why is it that these people haven't maintained their economic superiority over the eons, considering they founded great civilizations? Is
Yeah.
basically the
Peter,
question.
yeah. Peter Turchin has gotten some very interesting theories on this. Peter Turchin's one of my favorite historians ever. And there's a couple things. The first of which is before the Iron Age, you didn't have to have a coherent society to have an empire. You just had to have a bunch of chariots and you could oppress the peasantry. So the areas that were successful in the Bronze Age and didn't face pressure outwards to like work together, places like Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, they didn't get a coherent, they didn't it was always the elites oppressing the population. And so there wasn't, once the Iron Age showed up, and in the Iron Age, you had to have big armies of people working together to fight against barbarians and stuff. They didn't really have, they had trouble moving forward because it was just a one-dimensional relationship between the elite and the population, and that did not breed good conditions. So that's why Iraq, Egypt, and Syria and stuff, they got conquered continuously because it was just transferred from the native elite suppressing the population to the new elite suppressing the population. Also something, or the foreign elite suppressing the population. Something to consider also is that when you get big empires, you really remove the impetus of external threats. And so what happens in a lot of circumstances, like in the Roman Empire, was that the elite started oppressing their own population rather than working together against outsiders. The Romans enslaved lots of people, then brought them to Italy and Greece and destroyed the economies there, where in like areas like Sicily and stuff, the Romans created massive slave ranches where the entire populations of those areas were slaves, and a lot of the economy was cattle, and cows are one of the most economically inefficient animals you can use. And so the Romans really destroyed a lot of Italian society by just having mass slavery, and that's what happens in a lot of the centers of the empires because without an opponent, the elites turn on the population.
Question from Jan Pakawiski. Will the United States and Canada merge into one country encompassing the whole of North America minus Mexico?
I think it's possible at some point because in general, every part of Canada has more in common with the part of America next to it than other parts of those same countries. And the Quebecois have a term for Anglo-Canadians called mapism, in that the only thing that separates Anglo-Canadians from Anglo-Americans is the map. And at some point, economics and popular will align so that parts of Canada will join America. And Canada is a massively complex confederacy where all the parts balance each other out. And when one part of Canada goes, the rest have to go. Like Alberta and Quebec are in alliance against Ontario. The Anglo province, the West is in an alliance against the East. So once the alliance structure breaks up, a lot of Canadians would prefer to be independent or part of America than with the other Canadians.
Um, I might draw issue with you on that, but you're Canadian. I just spend a lot of time there. I would say what would be the point? But anyway, this is your live stream. Any thoughts on Rwanda? And that's from Mihir Gupta.
They've become like one of the wealthier countries in Africa. They have massive economic freedom. They're considered very stable. I've heard there's potential that they could become like a flight hub in Africa. So that's really cool. Um, and it's interesting to see those Central African countries do well. Like Uganda is sliding into dictatorship. Not pleasant. Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, they all had very good records. Same as Tanzania.
Kenya. There's even a
Yeah,
Silicon Valley in Kenya. The,
yeah,
the level of civic governance is that high in Rwanda that I believe once a month citizens are told to go out and clean the streets, and they do it.
yeah,
That
yeah,
shows you how what a cohesive society that you
yeah,
have. And Kigami, the
yeah,
president, actually got Rwanda to join the Commonwealth, and it was never a British colony. But he said it's because it
wow,
symbolised good governance, etc. So,
wow, interesting.
so Rwanda is a very special country considering its relatively recent history. Uh, Jerry John Teray, thoughts on the effect of a civil war in Myanmar to its local community, i.e., Thailand, India, China, etc.
Civil war in Myanmar would quickly become a proxy war between India/America and China. Um, I wonder if it would be a civil war between the military and between factions in the military, because you can't really have civil wars in the military and the general population is the military just wins, or between the Burmese and the other ethnic minorities like the Karens, like the Rohingya, like all the mountain peoples, where in Myanmar you have the Burmese in the center, and then in the hills you've got all the ethnic minorities. Um, and I think if the long-term civil war would just become a buffer war between China and America, or China and India to be more fair.
Uh, 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 from Israel, are you familiar with code Greece, spelt Geass? If
Oh
yeah,
yeah, that. I
yeah,
don't
what?
watch anime. I know of its existence. Never saw it.
All right, there you go. Um,
Code Geass.
Okay, for Monk of Games, sorry. What would happen if Journey remilitarizes?
They'd be remarkably powerful and they'd project it eastwards. Their supply chain is in Eastern Europe. I don't think they'd go full Nazi because that was so horrifying and they realized it was horrifying. But Germany, if it wanted to, could be one of the greatest military powers on the planet because they're so industrialized and efficient.
I, let me throw something into the mix. It wouldn't be allowed. The Americans still have bases there. The French wouldn't allow it
Yeah,
for historical reasons. There were the
yeah,
other major powers in Western
yeah,
Europe wouldn't allow German
yeah,
remilitarization, not significant German remilitarization.
yeah,
It would completely and utterly destabilize NATO. NATO would be
yeah,
over, and the EU. So it wouldn't be
yeah.
allowed. You
That's
know,
entirely fair.
yeah. De facto,
Yeah,
Germany has been denuded of a foreign policy, and it's
yeah,
been subsumed into the EU for the sake of
yeah.
Europe.
Yeah, unless the Russians go too hard, and then the Americans would, everyone would, unless if the Russians were really a threat, then everyone in Europe would allow the Germans to remilitarize.
Um, Here's a country we haven't talked about: Tunisia. Will Tunisia's democracy survive?
I honestly don't know enough. I haven't studied the Maghreb in great detail. It seems the Tunisian democracy seems to have hobbled on for like 10 years in a haphazard manner, and I don't see any impetus that would really destroy it. Although haven't studied the region enough to see that impetus. The Maghreb's having a lot of population growth, so I guess that could be destabilizing. They've had economic stagnation. So I just think the democracy will keep going until something big happens. And I don't know what that big thing would be.
Pascal Gomez, do you think there's going to be new countries on Mars and the Moon when we go to colonize them?
It would take a while. I think it's got to be a national project where once it gets to a certain size, it's got to be countries doing the colonization, and that they would not be willing to let those countries become independent in any real manner. I mean, I can't imagine the US or China colonizing Mars and letting them become, they could become protectorates, but not independent in a realistic manner.
Okay, how much longer do you want to do this for,
I
Rudyard?
normally go out after an hour and a half, so we should probably stop in the next couple minutes.
Brilliant. Okay. Um, Bird lover. This question has been asked a few times. Thoughts on Mexico's future? Could it ever become a superpower?
So Mexico has had a really rough history. I think I'm actually optimistic because Mexico is industrializing on the American frontier, and there's a large amount of Mexican Americans who have connections in Mexico, and there's actually a big migration of Mexican Americans back to Mexico because they can get better jobs there. If you have an engineering degree and speak Spanish, you can get better work in Mexico than in America. And I think the connection to the United States will result in a generation of Mexicans in the northern frontier growing up with higher expectations of their own government, and that connection will result in Mexico gradually improving itself. And I don't think in the next 100 years Mexico is going to become super powered, but I think that it'll gradually result in Mexico becoming wealthier and more coherent and less corrupt.
All right, let's do two more questions. Which country is the best in terms of life quality between Sweden, the UK, and the Netherlands?
I haven't lived in any of these countries, so I can't tell you. Statistically, Sweden's got the highest rating. Every stat I've seen would have put Sweden highest on that list. But I mean, I don't know the actual. I don't know what it's like to live in Sweden or the UK. I don't know what the culture like. I don't know what countries people are friendliest in, who has the best food, that stuff.
Uh, Britain has the best food, of course, fish and chips. That's self-evident. Last question, Cody Hindsight. What are your thoughts on Romania? Will it unite with Moldova?
I thought the Russians were keeping those two from unifying. I thought Moldova was also a corrupt oligarchy that didn't want to unite with Romania because that would remove them from power and make them less accountable or make them accountable. So they realistically should be unified, but Moldova really doesn't want it now. It's probably going to happen at some point because they're the same ethnic group.
There you go, folks. We've done 1 hour and 30 minutes of a live stream. You've put your questions to the
Great.
great man himself, and I think he's done a decent job answering your questions. If you want to
Thank you very much.
want to interact with Rudyard again, what you can do is maybe join Intelligent Speech, which is happening next week. Go to intelligentspeechconference.com. You've got details for that. But tell us what your next video is going to be, Rudyard.
Next video is Crisis of the 21st Century. I've I've finished it. I need to send it off to my editor, and it'll be out early next week.
So fantastic. Look out for that. There you go. There is the script. And if you're interested in following me at all, I've got a whole load of podcasts, 10 American Presidents, How Jamaica Conquered the World, and the Things That Made England. And there's a rather good episode I did a few months ago about the history of fish and chips. So that culinary delight that made England great. So that's all from us. Rudyard saying goodbye, me saying goodbye. Don't forget, it's a wonderful channel. Keep watching it, folks. And keep supporting Rudyard and all of his works. Take care.
Okay. Thank you very much. Goodbye, guys. See you next month.